This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. Hello and welcome to This Day, a history show from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, May 17th, 1980. Riots and violence begin in Miami's black neighborhoods of Overtown and Liberty City. They would last for about 3 days, resulting in at least 18 deaths. And look, when we've talked about racial uprising and riots and rebellions on this podcast, we've talked a lot about the late 1960s, that long, hot summer of 1967. And of course, we've talked about the Rodney King Rebellion in the early 90s. But right in between that, the late 60s, the early 90s, there are these Miami incidents, which were the deadliest urban riots in a single city throughout all of the 70s and 80s, but perhaps a little less remembered than those other incidents. And it all started because of the death of a man named Arthur McDuffie after an encounter with the police, and then the acquittal a few months later of the police officers involved in his death. Sound familiar, folks? Here to discuss, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
So every time we discuss a moment like this, and we did this especially during our episode on Rodney King, our multiple episodes on Rodney King, we use language like riot, but also rebellion, uprising, violence. And I know both in academic circles, but then I think in important, just sort of larger cultural ways, that kind of language matters. So you want to start there, and we'll just we'll just be upfront about the fact that we're kind of these terms are all swirling around, right?
These terms, they start in sort of academia and then they sort of trickle down, and it takes a little while before there's like full-on buy-in. And you may notice this, like we do this with like the civil rights movement versus the long freedom struggle. But I think people are trying to get more specific and more nuanced in terms of how we label these ideas. Riots seem to be very chaotic, and I think that idea of it makes people want to dismiss them more, to say like, oh, those ruckus rioters. But when you call it a rebellion, it gives it purpose. It lets people know that people are actually in opposition to something, that they are actually responding to something, that it is not just necessarily a spontaneous reaction that is based on like chaos. It is actually people who are rebelling against the system that has been pretty violent toward them.
Right. Riots are reactive and they're emotional and they're just all id, whereas rebellion gives it a kind of intellectual or political purpose. There's a reason people are rising up, and it's not just wanton destruction, but it's against some kind of injustice in the system.
That's so fascinating and important to keep in mind. And also, I think neither of you are saying, I don't think any of the sort of scholarship around this is trying to ignore the fact that there is violence going on, right? And I think that's sometimes the sort of pushback against changing the term or whatever. It's like, well, you're diminishing the violence. It's like, no, I think the goal is to try and contextualize and understand. So to that point, let's contextualize and understand. And we talk about a purpose and a reason. As I said, it all starts, I think you do wind this story back to the death of Arthur McDuffie. So what is the incident? And then we'll get to the trial.
Sure. So Arthur McDuffie is riding his Kawasaki motorcycle, big orange and black motorcycle, 1973. And allegedly he either runs a stop sign or runs a red light and is subsequently pulled over, or tried to be pulled over, by the police. And instead of pulling over, there's this massive chase that takes place. And the chase is going all through neighborhoods. They're going about 80 miles per hour through residential areas. There are claims that the police were shooting at McDuffie while he was riding his bike. He eventually gets pulled over, and that's when all of hell breaks loose. He's yanked off his motorcycle. He's beaten, hit multiple times over his head. He has huge skull fractures. And it is not just one police officer. It's sort of a gang of police officers that have decided to sort of take out their anger on him. And they say that he's resisting arrest, or that he tried to kick a police officer. There's all of these, sort of counter narratives that are happening. But at the end of this, he's sent to the hospital, and 4 days later, he dies from his injuries. And that is what starts a chain of events, of legal activity, of police being arrested, of a trial, and et cetera, et cetera.
I want to dig a little into some of the details of the incident itself and a little bit of who McDuffie is. He's borrowed this motorcycle from a cousin. He is riding he has a number of traffic citations and a suspended license when he starts to get pulled over. When they finally track him down, he crashes, hits his head. There's a report that the police drove a squad car over the motorcycle to make the incident look more like an accident. There was unlike Rodney King, there's no video here, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of this is rumor and which side story do you believe? But Which is
why I think this is lesser known, too.
Yeah.
The Rodney King video went viral, where this was something no one could see.
Yeah. But I think, by all accounts, the police, after the chase, they're so amped up, to your point. I mean, they just come in with a sort of vengeance and start to beat him. The coroner's report concludes he had multiple skull fractures, one of which was 10 inches long.
And we should say that, speaking of competing narratives, the idea that he was in a motorcycle accident, that was coming from the police. That was used to excuse his injuries, which another reporter said were the equivalent of being dropped off of a 4-story building onto concrete.
Oh, gosh.
And then other things come out about McDuffie. He's not just the guy who had traffic violations that is leading the cops on a chase, but he's a Marine Corps. He's the father of 2 children. He's an insurance salesman, which says he's 33 years old. He would eventually be buried wearing his full U.S. Marine Corps uniform. But I think it's so important to point out, and this pattern plays back all the way into the 19th century, 18th century, the role of competing rumors and narratives spreading like wildfire and, as we said, kind of accumulating to this moment. But obviously the other big incident, or the other big precipitating moment, is the trial. So let's talk through that.
Yeah.
So for the trial, the reason the police are tried at all is because one of the officers comes forward and confesses to having staged the accident and to these officers having beaten McDuffie. And after he comes forward, 5 white Dade County police officers involved in McDuffie's beating were charged in connection with both the killing and the cover-up. And the state actually responds with a good deal of vigor. They say they're going to prosecute these officers. They go on trial for second-degree murder, manslaughter, tampering with evidence. And there are parts of the trial that are televised. It's not actually like the big, long, televised O.J. trial in the 1990s. What happens instead is there are clips that are shown in the news in the Miami area every night. And so you get Miamians exposed to some pretty horrific testimony. I mean, they get to see the testimony of someone who is explaining the extent of the beating and of McDuffie's injuries. And so there's a kind of sense as the trial is going on that this is a bit of an open and shut case, right? The expectation is that these men are going to be found guilty. And ultimately, that's not what happens.
It's not. I mean, it's an all-white, all-male jury, acquits 4 defendants. They deliberate for 2 hours and 40 minutes. The 5th defendant had been acquitted earlier, so full acquittals across the board. One juror says, McDuffie's death was a tragedy, but that he felt that the Dade County Public Safety Department and the state's attorney's office were in such a hurry to appease everybody that they blew their case. What is your reaction to that kind of judgment about the way that the trial was conducted rather than the incident at the heart of the trial?
I think this is really common. I think that it is a way, especially given the demographics of that jury, right? The jury has moved out of Miami to Tampa. It's all white, all male. And that tendency to try to find sort of exculpatory sort of excuses for giving these officers a pass, because the jurors identify more with the officer than with the victim. And this, I mean, the same thing happens in the Rodney King police officer's trial as well.
Yeah. There is always more of an onus put on like sort of following a rule to the T than there is about like getting justice for the person that has been most harmed. So if there's any sort of caveat, it's like, oh, well, you know, if they had only done this, then maybe they would have gotten a better outcome or a different outcome. Like, it feels very contrived in that way. I'm always shocked that Black communities rarely have incidences like right in that moment. It's like there's always like, we're going to wait for a trial. We're going to wait for justice. We're going to wait for like sort of the wheels to turn and to sort of like for them to act accordingly. We're going to give you an opportunity to like do this the right way. And when that doesn't happen, all hell breaks loose.
It's also worth saying that in the like a year or two prior to this incident, there had been other incidents with police officers, one where a white officer had sexually assaulted a Black girl, where an officer had killed a couple of Black people. And in both of those cases, the officers had been acquitted as well. So it's not just like toleration for waiting for the system to play out. It's like waiting for the system to play out in case after case after case and not receiving any sort of justice. And because the expectations were so high this time, I think that's part of why there's such an explosion. Same thing in the Rodney King trial. Because there was a video, people were like, absolutely, they're going to get found guilty.
Yeah, and police officers saying, yes, I set this up, or yes, I acted, unlawfully. Like, that seems to be pretty cut and dry.
Kellie, I mean, it's such an important point that sort of uprising, the burst of emotion and reaction happens when there's a perceived miscarriage of justice as opposed to right after the initial incident. Yeah. And I can't help but think that the number of times we've talked on this show about lynchings of Black men by white mobs, that often happens right after the initial incident, often on a rumor of an incident, and it sort of intervenes between the incident and the attempt at finding justice. And so it is an instructive comparison.
It really is. Yeah.
Hey there, it's David Plotz, host of Slate's Political Gabfest, the longest-running politics podcast. It can be hard to know what news is worth your attention, which is why every week my co-hosts Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson and I find the most important stories of the week so you don't have to. We dig into everything from Trump's immigration policies to critical court cases and everything in between. We also keep some good humor while doing it.
Why is the Tic Tac shaped that way?
Listen to the Political Gabfest now and join us as we go even deeper on the daily news you're already following. That's Political Gabfest, wherever you get your podcasts.
Tariffs, meme coins, Girl Scout cookies. What do these all have in common? Come on, folks. It's all about the money. Economics is everywhere and everything. It's fueling our lives, even where we least expect it. And look, if you listen to this day, that means I know that you are interested in context and the hidden stories that help explain our world. So I recommend to you that you listen to Planet Money from NPR. The Planet Money is a different kind of world where the complex economy actually makes sense. Human stories instead of abstract theories. It is econ brought down to earth. For me, going all the way back to 2008 and the giant pool of money, where Planet Money first helped me understand the financial crisis, I have relied on this show. It is accessible, it is fun, it's surprising. It's one of those shows that when you listen to it, you kind of think to yourself, why isn't this the only show that I listen to? Another great thing I'll tell you about Planet Money, they are absolute pioneers in the shorter podcast. It's about 30 minutes. You'll learn a lot. You get in, get out, nice and accessible. So it's time to check it out. Tune in to Planet Money every week for entertaining stories and insights about how money shapes our world. These are stories that cannot be found anywhere else. Listen now to Planet Money from NPR. So here's something that happens every year as it gets warmer. I put away my winter clothes, I take a look at my closet, and I think to myself, man, my rotation is pretty worn out. Same polos, same shorts, same lightweight pants as last year. So I have to buy a bunch of items to feel like I'm ready to embrace summer. Now, let me tell you about something that doesn't happen every year. Me getting compliments on the summer clothes that I purchased. But I am here to tell you, listener, that it has been happening ever since I refreshed my wardrobe with some items from Quince. Just last week on a taping of this show, Kellie said, "That's a really nice polo shirt." It is, and it's actually called a cotton silk polo sweater. It's got a nice little white trim, some great texture to the material. I've got these linen pants that are getting some compliments. They cost under $50, by the way. Same with the chore jacket I got. A friend of mine at the bar the other day reached over and did that little, "Ooh, this is nice" thing and felt the fabric. Listeners, this could be you. Quince's pieces are easy, elevated, and somehow make you feel more put together without even trying. Treat your closet to a little summer glow up with Quince. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/thisday for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday. So, as I said, this sort of uprising, the violence plays out over 3 days. Just that very night after the acquittal, people start to pour into the streets shouting McDuffie, especially in the neighborhood of Liberty City, which is the predominantly black area where McDuffie had been beaten. The next day, May 17th, approximately 5,000 people attend a protest downtown at the Justice Building. There is then reports that 3 white men are reportedly pulled from a car and beaten to death. Another was burned to death in his car. It is exploding into chaos. And I mean, it's just amazing how much this presages what we saw play out with Rodney King,
Oh, yeah. And the LA riots. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's very, very similar. And not just in the LA riots, but even in the riots, rebellions, I should say, of the 1960s. Like, you see this in Watts, you see this in Newark, you see this in Detroit, you see this in cities all across the country that are exploding with racial violence, often related to police brutality. When those acts of violence can't be enacted against the police, then regular bystanders who get in the crosshairs of that uprising are most at risk for being harmed. So it's never like the actual police officers themselves that get, beat up or roughed up. It's always someone that is representative of that power structure group.
Yeah, and you see that too with like the burning down of white businesses sometimes, right? Like there's a kind of striking back at symbols or stand-ins for the systems of injustice, because the systems of injustice themselves are much more difficult to actually access to rebel against.
And it gets complicated because, in this particular incident, the spokesperson for the police commission is a black man, and he's having to present a narrative in which he's like, yo, my colleagues just killed my friend. Like, I knew McDuffie. I went to school with him. I have this history with this person. And how do I serve sort of like these two roles between the black community and the police department? And you start to see that a little bit more too, as you start to see how police departments become a little bit more integrated and they start to hire more police officers. Those black police officers that they hire get put between a rock and a hard place and trying to integrate, but also trying to be in solidarity with the community as well.
Some of the incidents, some of the way this plays out is really tragic and scary and gruesome. And there's all these rumors that there are snipers in the area, so the National Guard's a little tentative to go in. I do want to take a moment to talk about a really tragic incident that involves a young girl named Shenrika Perry Davis and a man named Jeffrey Culp. So Davis lives in a neighborhood in which some protests and riots were breaking out, and she was apparently playing softball nearby and spotted a family member and started running to her. And at the same time, these two brothers, Michael Culp and Jeffrey Culp, were driving into the same area, two white men, and they start to drive basically into the crowd. And the crowd gets riled up, starts throwing things at them. They hit the gas, speed through the crowd, and end up hitting Shenrika Perry Davis, dragging her 50 feet and pinning her to a wall. The crowd descends on the car, drags the brothers out of the car, and the men are beaten, and Jeffrey Culp is stabbed, shot, and actually mutilated. His ear and tongue are cut off, and there's reports that someone put a rose in his mouth. He dies several days later from his injuries, and the young girl loses a leg. just really horrific and tragic and extremely violent in the midst of all this.
Oh, it's extremely violent. And I don't think people have an appreciation for the kind of harm and rage that people have in this moment. It's again, it's so much bigger than McDuffie. Like as you were saying, Nick, earlier, that like it's injustice on top of injustice on top of injustice, and then that breeds even more violence.
It does take a couple days for this to die down. The presence of the National Guard has a huge part in it. As always, there is looting, vandalism, robbery as part of this as well. That becomes a big contested narrative. About $100 million worth of property destruction. That's in the swirl here too. Niki, what do we make of this? I mean, once the sort of 3 days of violence die down, no surprise, there's a ton of reporting. There's a ton of sort of reckoning with what transpired. Where does that all land?
A lot of reckoning, actually. So part of it is trying to understand why the Miami uprising felt so different. And there are researchers who look at it and they say, well, this was the first time that it really felt like, or this not the first time, but this was different from the riots that we think about in the 1960s, because here the targets really were like, we need to hurt some white people, whichever white people come within this area. And it's actually very reminiscent of some of this uprisings of enslaved people that we've talked about,
right,
where white people, because they represented the oppressor and the enslaver, become the victims of that violence. Now, there were black people saving white people in the midst of this. There were white people saving black people. It's not a one clear-cut story, but that becomes kind of the defining idea around the Miami uprising, is that, well, this is different because there was this explicit targeting of white people. There's also just, the federal government decides that they should give funds to Miami to help rebuild and invest in these neighborhoods to ensure that there's more economic stability and to try to rebuild these areas. That only kind of works out because a lot of the money gets redirected away from some of these neighborhoods. And then the police are really pissed off about it. And so the Miami Fraternal Order of Police, the police organization, threatens to walk out unless these officers are reinstated, they get their jobs back. There's just this kind of like, there's not peace after, I guess is what I would say. There's a lot of reckoning, but it's never really fully reckoned with. And I think that might, too, be part of the reason that it fades into history.
Mm-hmm. It's also interesting, too, because the people who are the black community is not largely unemployed and impoverished. And I think that part of the rebellions that you saw in the 60s were about poverty, it was about mass unemployment, it was about so many other social political tensions that created this explosive system. But when it's really about police brutality, it's really about like, no, there are some bad apples. To address that, you think what might be a lot easier to address that than it would be like, massive unemployment or poverty. And yet that's not the situation in Miami.
So two larger pieces of context, one Miami and one the country. I know we have a lot of listeners in Miami who probably know this history quite deeply, but this is an interesting inflection point in the history of Miami, not just a sort of notable incident, but as this is happening, Miami has its first Latino mayor. A lot of white people in the wake of this leave kind of downtown and head north and out of the county. And there is a version of the story in which this is really a moment in which sort of Latino power kind of fills in and starts to really white flight and then Latino power on the rise, and it really reshapes the kind of politics and demographics of the city. The other larger context is, this is 1980, this is Carter, election year. I feel like we don't talk about this in the story of the malaise of Jimmy Carter, right? And who knows? I mean, I feel like this probably played an incident, like the most high-profile racialized violence since the late 60s happens under Carter's watch, right at this other moment that gas prices are through the roof and he's seen as weak. I think we kind of have to add this to that story of that moment in the Carter presidency.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea the wheels are coming off. The other one little piece of context that I would add is that Janet Reno is the state's attorney general at the time.
So fascinating.
And Black Miamians and Floridians blame her for not getting these prosecutions, for not bringing charges in other cases of police brutality and police corruption. This does not stop her rise in national politics, of course. She becomes the first woman attorney general under Clinton. And our friend and a really amazing historian, Elizabeth Hinton, charts a little bit of this in her book, America on Fire. But I think in her next book, she's going to connect some dots between what's happening in Miami in 1980 and how Reno does as attorney general in the 1990s.
Really fascinating. No surprise. It all connects.
Always.
Okay, well, we will leave it there. I'm really glad we got to this one. Super interesting story. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
At the start of the demonstration, things were peaceful. But as the crowd grew, tempers began to flare. The Metro Justice Building became the center of frustration. Bricks and bottles were thrown in the window of the Metro Justice Building, and several cars were overturned and burned. The violence quickly spread to surrounding streets.
The guardsmen were the first to see close up the extent of the destruction. It looked like a war zone. Off 27th Avenue and 62nd Street, huge billows of black smoke filled the sky. The fires burned out of control. On almost every block of 27th Avenue between 36th Street and 79th Street, the scars of the McDuffie riot were burning deep into the community.
Radiotopia.